Richard Davenport believed the world was a stage, and he was its star. He saw his wife, Catherine, as a beautiful but bland part of the set dressing, reliable, unassuming, and utterly predictable. Tonight, he was stepping into the spotlight at the most exclusive party of the year, held on a billionaire's yacht. With a vibrant, adoring woman on his arm, he was ready to claim his destiny. He told Catherine he was on a business trip, a simple lie for a simple woman. He had no idea that the stage he was about to step onto wasn't his at all. He was merely a guest in a play he didn't know he was cast in, and the director, the producer, and the owner of the entire production was the one woman he had so foolishly underestimated. The scent of old money and new ambition clung to the air in Richard Davenport's sprawling suburban home. It was a scent he cultivated with the same meticulous care he applied to his Italian leather shoes and his carefully curated collection of Swiss watches. The house, a formidable structure of grey stone and cold glass overlooking a manicured lawn, was his testament to success. Or rather, he considered it his. In truth, it was Catherine's. A detail lost on Richard, who saw everything his wife possessed as a mere extension of himself. Catherine Vance, who had taken his name but not his nature, was an enigma he'd long stopped trying to solve. He'd married her for her quiet grace and what he perceived as a malleable, gentle spirit. She was the perfect backdrop for a man like him, beautiful in a classic, understated way that never threatened to outshine him, and seemingly content with a life dictated by charity luncheons and garden club meetings. He found her predictable, her routines as soothingly monotonous as the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. He loved her, he supposed, in the way one loves a comfortable, well-worn armchair. It was familiar, supportive, and you never had to think about it. "I'll be in Seattle until Sunday," Richard announced, striding into the kitchen. He loosened the silk tie at his neck, the picture of a man burdened by immense responsibility. "The Blackwood merger is at a critical stage. Harrison is flying the whole executive team out." Catherine was at the Marble Island, arranging a bouquet of white hydrangeas. She didn't look up, her focus entirely on the delicate placement of a stem. "Oh, that's sudden. I thought the meetings were in New York next week." Her voice was calm, a placid lake he could skim across without a second thought. He felt a familiar flicker of irritation at her lack of awe for his corporate world. "Things change, darling. The market waits for no one. It's a last-minute power move. We'll be on his private jet." He added the last detail for effect, expecting it to impress her. "I see," she said, finally turning. Her eyes, a deep, thoughtful grey, met his. There was no glimmer of suspicion, no hint of curiosity, just a placid acceptance that was both a relief and, in a strange way, an insult. Did she really care so little about his life? "Well, be sure to pack a warm coat. I hear the weather in Seattle is quite unpredictable this time of year." He almost laughed. Seattle. The lie had slipped off his tongue so easily. He wasn't going to Seattle. He was going to Newport Harbor, to the most anticipated social event of the season, a private party aboard the mega yacht, the Serenity, rumored to be owned by a reclusive tech magnate. The invitation had come through his boss, Harrison Blackwood, and it was the golden ticket Richard had been waiting for. This was his chance to rub shoulders with the true titans of industry, the kind of men who didn't just own companies but shaped economies. And he wouldn't be taking his quiet, sensible wife. He would be taking Tiffany. Tiffany Monroe was everything Catherine was not. She was a firework of vibrant colour and loud laughter. She was 26, with a cascade of blonde hair that wasn't entirely her own, and a relentless ambition that matched his. She looked at him with the wide-eyed adoration he felt he deserved, marveling at his stories of boardroom battles and corporate takeovers. She was a thrill, an accessory that screamed success far louder than his reserved wife ever could. Taking Catherine to a party like this would be like bringing a librarian to a rock concert. She wouldn't know how to perform. Tiffany, on the other hand, was born for the stage. "I'll have Mrs. Gable pack my things," he said, dismissing the conversation. He leaned in to kiss Catherine's cheek. Her skin was cool, and she smelled faintly of lavender and soap. It was the scent of home, of stability, and right now it felt like a cage. "Don't wait up for me tonight. I have to work late to prepare." "Of course, Richard," she replied, her voice smooth as silk. "Work hard, and do be careful." He walked away, already mentally rehearsing the persona he would adopt for the evening. The powerful, ascendant executive with a stunning beauty on his arm. He didn't see the look in Catherine's eyes as she watched him go. He didn't see the placid surface of the lake ripple, revealing a depth he couldn't possibly imagine. He didn't notice that her hand, the one not holding a flower stem, was resting on a sleek, encrypted tablet, its screen displaying the final manifest for a private event, a manifest that had his name on it, and next to it, a single damning annotation: "Guest, unconfirmed." She carefully placed the last hydrangea into the vase, the picture of domestic tranquility. The illusion was perfect, and it was about to be shattered. The drive to Newport Harbor was a symphony of Richard's self-satisfaction. He sat behind the wheel of his Porsche, a car he'd bought himself as a bonus, feeling the thrum of the engine as a physical extension of his own power. Beside him, Tiffany Monroe was a dazzling spectacle. She wore a crimson dress that was less a piece of clothing and more a statement of intent, clinging to her curves in a way that left little to the imagination and everything to be desired. Diamonds, rented, though she didn't know that, sparkled at her throat and ears, catching the last rays of the setting sun. "I still can't believe we're going to this," she breathed, her voice a husky purr. She ran a perfectly manicured hand along the smooth leather of the dashboard. "A party on the Serenity. Everyone has been talking about it for months. They say the owner is richer than God and almost as invisible." "He's not invisible to the right people, Tiff," Richard said, a smug smile playing on his lips. He enjoyed educating her on the nuances of the world he was so close to conquering. "In our world, it's not about who you are, it's about who you know. Harrison Blackwood knows him, and I am Harrison's right-hand man. It's simple mathematics." "My brilliant man," she cooed, leaning over to kiss his cheek, leaving a faint smear of coral lipstick. "You're going to own this town one day." He believed it. Tonight felt like a coronation. He had the car, the woman, the invitation. He had meticulously constructed this version of himself, the version that deserved a seat at the table. He thought of Catherine, likely at home reading a book, or perhaps attending one of her tedious charity board meetings. He felt a pang, not of guilt, but of pity. Pity for her small, circumscribed life. She would never understand the thrill of the hunt, the electric buzz of ambition that fueled him. She was content in her gilded cage, while he was destined to rule the jungle. As they neared the marina, the scale of the wealth on display became breathtaking. A forest of masts pierced the twilight sky, belonging to vessels that were less boats and more floating mansions. But even among these giants, the Serenity stood apart. It was colossal, a sleek, multi-decked marvel of modern engineering, gleaming white under the marina lights, with lines so sharp and elegant it looked like it was slicing through the water even while docked. It was over 300 feet of pure, unadulterated power, with a helicopter sitting nonchalantly on its upper deck. A quiet army of crew members in crisp white uniforms moved about with silent efficiency. For the first time that evening, a sliver of doubt pierced Richard's bravado. This was a level of wealth that made his Porsche feel like a child's toy. This wasn't just success. It was dominance. He quickly suppressed the feeling, replacing it with a surge of possessive desire. This was the world he belonged in. He would not be intimidated. "Oh my God, Richard," Tiffany whispered, her voice filled with genuine awe. It's a palace. And we, my dear, have an invitation to the throne room," he said, his confidence returning. He valet-parked the car and took her arm, striding towards the gangplank as if he owned the place. He gave his name to a stern-looking man with an earpiece, who checked it against a tablet and nodded curtly. "Mr. Davenport, welcome aboard." As they stepped onto the polished teak deck, the sound of a string quartet and muted, sophisticated chatter washed over them. Waitstaff glided through the crowd with trays of champagne and impossibly intricate hors d'oeuvres. The guests were a collection of faces he recognized from the covers of business magazines and society pages: CEOs, senators, old money scions, and tech billionaires. He saw Harrison Blackwood across the deck, holding court with a group of investors, and felt a jolt of pride. He had arrived. Tiffany clung to his arm, her eyes wide. "This is insane. Look, isn't that Governor Peterson? And Beatrice Langley, the columnist?" "Try to act like you've been here before," Richard muttered, though he was just as star-struck. He grabbed 2 glasses of champagne, handing one to her. "Mingle, but don't wander off. Stick with me. We need to project an image of a power couple." He was so engrossed in his performance, in curating every glance and handshake, that he failed to notice the subtle currents moving beneath the glittering surface of the party. He didn't see the way certain guests would glance at him, then at Tiffany, before sharing a whispered comment with their companion. He didn't register the oddly knowing smiles from the crew. He was an actor on a stage, blinded by the footlights, completely unaware that the audience already knew the plot, knew the twist, and were just waiting for the final, devastating act to begin. He scanned the crowd, looking for the mysterious host, the invisible king of this floating castle, eager to pay his respects and make his mark. He had no idea he was about to meet the owner very, very soon. The air on the upper deck of the Serenity was thick with the scent of salt water and expensive perfume. Richard, with Tiffany fixed to his side like a designer accessory, navigated the crowd with a predatory grace. His objective was clear: find Harrison Blackwood, secure a brief but impactful introduction to their host, and solidify his position as an indispensable player in Blackwood's orbit. He spotted Blackwood near the stern, locked in an animated conversation with a senator and a hedge fund manager. Richard began to steer Tiffany in that direction, but their path was intercepted by a man who seemed to materialize out of the throng. The man was tall and impeccably dressed in a bespoke navy suit that probably cost more than Richard's monthly mortgage. He had dark, intelligent eyes, a warm but inscrutable smile, and an air of relaxed authority that made him the immediate center of gravity. Richard didn't recognize him. He was too young to be the reclusive owner, he reasoned. He must be a son, or perhaps the chief of staff. The gatekeeper. "Richard Davenport," the man said, extending a hand. His voice was smooth and carried an easy confidence. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. I'm Leo Maxwell." Richard shook his hand, surprised that this man knew his name. He must be more important than he looked. "The pleasure is all mine, Mr. Maxwell. This is an incredible vessel. My compliments to the host." He gestured vaguely, as if the host were a deity floating in the ether. Leo's smile widened slightly, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "We're very proud of her. And please, call me Leo." He then turned his attention to Tiffany, His gaze polite but brief, a quick professional assessment that catalogued her dress, her jewelry, and her eager expression in a single sweep. "And you must be his guest." The phrasing was odd. Not your lovely wife or your partner, just his guest. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible slight, but it pricked at Richard's ego. Tiffany, however, was oblivious. She beamed, offering her hand. "Tiffany Monroe, it is an absolute honor to be here. Your yacht is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "We're glad you like it, Miss Monroe," Leo replied, his tone perfectly courteous. His focus, however, immediately returned to Richard. "We've been expecting you, Mr. Davenport. In fact, your presence tonight is particularly significant." Richard's chest swelled with pride. Significant. He knew it. Blackwood must have been singing his praises to the host. The merger, his brilliant strategies, it was all paying off. "Well, I'm honored to be considered so. Harrison Blackwood has been a great mentor, and the work we're doing together is poised to reshape the industry." Leo nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Yes, Harrison Blackwood. He's here, of course, enjoying our hospitality." There was a peculiar emphasis on the word "our," but Richard was too busy basking in his own perceived importance to notice. "Before you get swept away, I must tell you that the owner of the Serenity makes it a point to personally greet every guest. She will be making her official welcome shortly. I do hope you'll stay for it." The host was a woman. Richard's internal calculations shifted. He had pictured a Howard Hughes-type figure, a grizzled old man hidden away from the world. A woman. That was unexpected. Probably some heiress who had inherited her father's or husband's fortune. It made the conquest less impressive, but perhaps she would be more susceptible to his charm. "A woman?" Tiffany whispered to him, as Leo excused himself and melted back into the crowd. "How fabulous. Maybe she's single. You think she's old?" "Doesn't matter," Richard murmured, his eyes scanning the crowd with renewed interest. "This changes the angle of approach, but not the goal." He felt a renewed sense of purpose. He would charm this mysterious matriarch, this queen of tech. He could do that. He was good with women. He looked at Tiffany, then thought of Catherine. He knew how to manage their expectations, how to play on their emotions. This would be easy. He decided to make his way to the bar to get a refill, feeling a new swagger in his step. As he waited, he overheard two women talking nearby. One was Beatrice Langley, the influential society columnist, whose words could make or break a reputation overnight. "Built it all from the ground up, you know," Beatrice was saying, her voice a low, conspiratorial hum. "Not inherited. They say she started in a garage, just 2 servers and an idea that everyone said was impossible. Wrote the original code herself. Incredible," her companion replied. "And to stay so private for so long, especially in this day and age. It's a masterclass in power. No one even knew what she looked like until about a year ago." Richard's ears perked up. A self-made woman. That was a different beast entirely, more formidable, more interesting. He felt a jolt of genuine excitement. This was a true peer. He felt a sudden, sharp disdain for the heiresses and socialites dotting the party. This woman, this owner, was like him. A builder, a visionary. He turned from the bar, champagne flute in hand, and saw Leo Maxwell again. This time he was standing with Harrison Blackwood, and the dynamic was all wrong. It wasn't Leo reporting to Harrison. It was Harrison, Richard's powerful, intimidating boss, who was listening with a rapt, almost deferential expression. Leo was speaking, and Harrison was nodding, his body language that of a subordinate. A cold knot of confusion began to form in Richard's stomach. Who the hell was Leo Maxwell? And why did his boss look like he was being called into the principal's office? The perfectly constructed reality he had built for this evening was beginning to crack at the foundations, and for the first time he felt a chilling premonition that he was not the star of this show, but a fool who had wandered onto the wrong set. The string quartet transitioned from Vivaldi to something more modern and melancholic, a subtle shift in the party's atmosphere that mirrored the growing unease in Richard's gut. He tried to dismiss the strange interaction between his boss and Leo Maxwell. Perhaps Maxwell was a key investor, a silent partner of immense influence. Yes, that had to be it. It was the only explanation that kept Richard's worldview intact. He finally caught Harrison Blackwood's eye across the deck. He gave a confident nod, raising his glass in a silent toast. Blackwood's response was not the warm, conspiratorial smile he expected. Instead, his boss's face tightened, his eyes flicking from Richard to the crimson-clad Tiffany and back again. The look he gave Richard was one of profound disappointment, laced with something else: pity. Before Richard could process this, Blackwood disengaged from his conversation and walked towards him. His stride was heavy, purposeful. "Davenport," he said, his voice low and tight, devoid of its usual bonhomie. "Harrison, what a night, an incredible gathering," Richard said, trying to project an air of effortless belonging. "I was just about to come find you. This is Tiffany Monroe." Tiffany offered a dazzling smile. "Mr. Blackwood, it's such an honor." Blackwood gave her a glance so fleeting it was barely a recognition. His cold, furious eyes were locked on Richard. "What in God's name are you doing, Richard?" The question hit Richard like a physical blow. "I'm sorry?" "Bringing her," Blackwood hissed, his voice a venomous whisper that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "To this event, of all the arrogant, idiotic, self-destructive things you have ever done. This takes the prize." Richard was completely bewildered. His carefully constructed reality was crumbling around him. "Harrison, I don't understand. She's my date. It's a party." Blackwood let out a short, incredulous laugh that was utterly devoid of humor. "A party? You think this is just a party? You fool! You think the invitation I extended was for you to bring your flavor of the month to show off? I invited you because I was trying to help you, to give you one last chance to salvage your career and perhaps your life. I assumed you would have the basic decency and intelligence to bring your wife." "My wife?" Richard stammered, the name sounding foreign in this context. "Catherine. Why would I bring Catherine? She has no interest in these things. She wouldn't fit in." The look of contempt on Blackwood's face deepened. "She wouldn't fit in," he repeated, as if tasting the words and finding them repulsive. "You have been married to that woman for 10 years, and you know so little about her that it is, without a doubt, the single greatest failure of your life. You see a quiet homemaker. The rest of the world that matters, sees one of the most brilliant and powerful minds of our generation." Richard's head was spinning. He felt a wave of dizziness, the champagne turning sour in his stomach. This was a nightmare, a bizarre, incomprehensible joke. "What are you talking about? Catherine, she runs a small charitable foundation for children's literacy. She organizes book drives." Blackwood stared at him for a long moment, and Richard saw a final flicker of pity in his eyes before it was extinguished by pure, cold fury. "You're finished, Davenport, not just at my firm. I think you're about to be finished everywhere." He turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Richard standing there, his face pale, his mind reeling. Tiffany, who had witnessed the entire exchange, looked horrified. "Richard, what was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. What did he mean about your wife? Richard couldn't answer. His gaze drifted across the deck, which now felt less like a party and more like an arena. He saw the whispers, the sideways glances, and understood them for the first time. They weren't looks of admiration. They were looks of morbid curiosity. They were all watching him, waiting for the axe to fall. His eyes found Leo Maxwell again. He was standing near a small, raised platform at the bow of the yacht, a microphone in his hand. The music faded, and a hush fell over the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Leo's smooth, amplified voice echoed across the deck, "if I could have your attention for a moment." Every face turned towards him. Richard felt a sense of dread so profound it was almost paralyzing. Tiffany gripped his arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. "For years, she has preferred to work behind the scenes," Leo continued, his voice resonating with genuine admiration. "She believes that the work should speak for itself, that innovation is more important than fame, and that integrity is more valuable than publicity. She built an empire not on a family name or an inheritance, but on a foundation of pure, unadulterated genius and relentless hard work." Richard felt his blood run cold. He knew, with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty, what was about to happen. It was impossible, insane, but he knew. "Tonight, we are not just celebrating the launch of the Aura satellite network, a project that will redefine global communications," Leo said, his smile widening. "We are celebrating the visionary who made it all possible. It is my deepest honor and my greatest privilege to introduce to you all my partner, my friend, and the founder and CEO of Vance Innovations, the owner of this yacht, the Serenity." Leo turned and gestured towards the grand staircase, leading down from the upper deck. A profound silence fell over the assembled guests. Richard's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He followed everyone's gaze. And then she appeared. She descended the staircase, not like the woman who arranged flowers in his kitchen, but like a queen descending to her court. The transformation was so absolute, so staggering, that for a moment Richard's mind refused to process it. This was not the Catherine he knew. The quiet, almost plain woman who favored simple cardigans and sensible shoes was gone. In her place was a figure of breathtaking power and elegance. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk that shimmered under the yacht's lights, cut in a severe, minimalist style that was more commanding than any frill or sequin could ever be. Her hair, usually tied back in a simple knot, was styled in a sleek, sophisticated chignon that exposed the graceful line of her neck. A single, magnificent diamond necklace rested against her collarbone, not a gaudy bauble, but a piece of art that bespoke a fortune so vast it had no need to shout. But it wasn't the dress or the diamonds that struck Richard dumb. It was her face. The gentle, unassuming features were the same, but they were animated by a confidence and an intelligence he had never seen before. Her grey eyes, which he had always thought of as placid, now held a sharp, analytical fire. There was a small, knowing smile on her lips, a smile that was not warm or inviting, but coolly triumphant. This was not his wife. This was a stranger, a titan, a force of nature. The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of genuine respect and admiration. Richard stood frozen, the champagne glass slipping from his nerveless fingers and shattering on the teak deck. Tiffany let out a small, strangled gasp beside him, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. Catherine reached the bottom of the stairs, where Leo Maxwell greeted her with a warm, deferential kiss on the cheek. She then moved to the microphone, her movements fluid and assured. The applause slowly died down as she prepared to speak. Her eyes swept across the assembled guests, the powerful and the influential, all of them looking up at her. Then her gaze found Richard. She looked directly at him, her expression unchanging, her eyes holding his for a long, silent moment across the crowded deck. In that single look, he saw everything: the years of his condescension, his dismissiveness, his casual cruelty, all of it seen, noted, and filed away. He saw the quiet patience of a woman playing a game so long and so complex that he never even knew he was a piece on the board. "Thank you, Leo," she began, her voice calm and clear, amplified for all to hear. It was the same voice that asked him if he wanted coffee in the morning, but now it held an authority that commanded the attention of billionaires and senators. "And thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate this milestone with Vance Innovations." Vance Innovations, her maiden name, the name of the small, insignificant charity she ran. It had been a front. All of it. The tedious board meetings, the book drives, the quiet afternoons spent in her office at home. She hadn't been organizing bake sales. She had been building a global tech empire. For a long time, she continued, her gaze finally leaving Richard to address the crowd, I believed that the best way to do good work was to do it quietly. I wanted my creations, not my name, to be known. I wanted to build a company based on merit, not personality. But I've come to realize that in the world we live in, silence can sometimes be mistaken for absence. And absence, she paused, her eyes finding Richard again, a flicker of something cold and sharp in their depths, can be mistaken for weakness. A murmur went through the crowd. Everyone understood the subtext. They all looked from the powerful woman at the podium to the pale, shattered man standing next to his garishly dressed mistress. The drama was unfolding exactly as she had planned. This wasn't just a product launch. It was a public execution. "So tonight we step into the light," Catherine declared, a new strength in her voice. "Vance Innovations is no longer a silent partner in progress. We are a leading force. The Aura network is just the beginning." She went on to speak about technology, about the future, about ethical innovation. Her speech was brilliant, insightful, and visionary. Richard heard none of it. The words were just noise, the buzzing of flies in a tomb. His tomb. He looked at Tiffany. Her face was ashen. The adoration in her eyes had been replaced by a dawning, sickening realization. She wasn't the guest of an up-and-coming executive. She was the unwitting accomplice in the public humiliation of a fool who had betrayed one of the most powerful women in the world. Her dreams of marrying into wealth and power dissolved into a nightmare. She was on the wrong side of history, a footnote in a story of epic karmic retribution. When Catherine finished her speech, the applause was thunderous. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile this time, as she was surrounded by a throng of well-wishers, a circle of power that Richard could never hope to penetrate. Harrison Blackwood was among the first to congratulate her, his face a picture of fawning respect. The party continued, but the energy had shifted. The central spectacle was over. Richard was no longer a guest. He was a ghost, an embarrassment that people politely ignored. He and Tiffany stood alone in a bubble of silent humiliation, the shattered glass at his feet, a perfect metaphor for his life. The illusion of his control, his success, his very identity, had been irrevocably smashed, and the woman holding the hammer was his wife. The world had narrowed to the space between Richard and Catherine. The chatter of the party, the music, the clinking of glasses, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. She had finished receiving her accolades and was now walking towards him. Her path was clear. People parted before her, as if by an invisible force. Leo Maxwell was a step behind her, his expression grim and protective. Richard's mind was a maelstrom of denial and rage. This was a trick, a lie, a grotesque, elaborate prank. But the cold certainty in Catherine's eyes told him it was all real. She stopped a few feet from him. She didn't look at Tiffany, dismissing her so completely that it was more insulting than any venomous glare. Her entire focus was on Richard. "Hello, Richard," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying the immense weight of their shared history and his profound betrayal. "Surprised to see me? I thought you were in Seattle." He could only stare, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish gasping for air. Words failed him. What could he say? Every lie, every condescending remark, every moment he had underestimated her, played back in his mind in a humiliating, high-speed montage. This is," he finally stammered. "How?" A faint, pitying smile touched her lips. "How? While you were practicing your golf swing, I was practicing coding. While you were at your long lunches, I was in negotiations with venture capitalists. While you were complaining about my charity work, that charity, Vance Innovations, was acquiring patents and securing government contracts. I built this, Richard, all of it, and I did it by being consistently, thoroughly underestimated, especially by you." Each word was a precisely placed scalpel, dissecting his ego, laying bare the pathetic man beneath the expensive suit. "The house," he whispered, the realization dawning. "The cars. My bonuses. The house was purchased by my company as an executive residence. You live there at my discretion," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion. It was a simple statement of fact. "The Porsche you're so proud of. It was a signing bonus for a deal I closed with a German tech firm. Your bonuses from Harrison's company were often facilitated by my silent investments in his firm, a gesture of goodwill I now deeply regret. I wanted my husband to feel successful. I propped you up, Richard. I built a pedestal for you, hoping you would eventually grow tall enough to deserve it. Instead, you just used the extra height to look down on me." Tiffany began to sob quietly, a desperate, hiccuping sound. "I didn't know," she whimpered, looking at Catherine. "I swear I had no idea." Catherine finally turned her gaze to Tiffany, and the coldness in her eyes was glacial. "You knew he was a married man. That's all you needed to know. You made your choice. Now you get to live with the consequences, just like him." She turned back to Richard. "I believe your things are already being packed. They will be delivered to your parents' address in Ohio tomorrow. The locks have been changed. The joint accounts have been frozen. Or rather, the allowance account I funded for you has been closed. My lawyers will be in touch with you tomorrow morning regarding the divorce proceedings. The prenuptial agreement you were so eager for me to sign is quite clear. You leave with what you brought into this marriage, which, if I recall, was a used sedan and student loan debt." Richard's face, which had been pale with shock, now flushed with impotent fury. "You can't do this! I am your husband." "No," Catherine said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, but it cut through the air with chilling finality. "You were a liability I could no longer afford. You became arrogant and sloppy. This little stunt tonight, bringing her here. It wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage, Richard. It was a business risk. You risked embarrassing me in front of my partners and investors." Her eyes flicked towards Harrison Blackwood, who was watching from a safe distance. "Speaking of which, Mr. Blackwood," Harrison approached, his face a mixture of fear and contrition. "Catherine, my deepest apologies for this situation." "It's Miss Vance," she corrected him coldly. And my apology is not what you should be concerned with. The merger you proposed between your company and mine is, of course, off the table. Permanently. I cannot, in good conscience, do business with a man who employs individuals with such a staggering lack of judgment and character. I would suggest you clean house, Harrison, starting immediately. Blackwood's face went white. He understood the command perfectly. He looked at Richard with pure hatred. Davenport, you're fired. Security will escort you out of the building on Monday morning. It was the final blow. In the space of 10 minutes, Richard had lost his wife, his home, his fortune, his career, and his reputation. He was nothing. Less than nothing. He was a cautionary tale, a laughing stock. "It's time for you to leave my party," Catherine said, her voice back to its calm, dispassionate tone. She gave a slight nod to her left. Two large men in discreet dark suits, part of the yacht's security detail, materialized at Richard's side. "Miss Vance," one of them said. "Please escort Mr. Davenport and his guest off my yacht," she instructed. "See that they get a taxi. I believe Mr. Davenport's car is no longer his to drive." Richard's body went rigid. Humiliation washed over him in a sickening wave. He looked around at the faces of the guests, who were now openly staring, their expressions ranging from pity to schadenfreude. This was a public crucifixion, and he was the main event. One of the security men gently but firmly took his arm. The touch was the final indignity. He was being physically removed, ejected from the world he had fought so desperately to join. He allowed himself to be led away, a weeping Tiffany stumbling behind him. As he was marched down the gangplank, back to the world of ordinary men, he looked back one last time. Catherine was standing on the deck, a glass of champagne in her hand, the lights of her magnificent yacht framing her like a halo. She was talking to Leo, a small, genuine smile on her face. She didn't watch him go. She had already forgotten him. He was a problem that had been solved, a loose end that had been tied. Her empire was secure, her future was bright, and he was no longer a part of it. The months that followed were a study in descent for Richard Davenport. The name that had once opened doors now closed them firmly in his face. The story of Catherine Vance's spectacular unveiling and his own public defenestration became the stuff of legend in business circles. A brutal, brilliant masterstroke of revenge and power. No one wanted to hire the man who had been so comprehensively outplayed, the fool who slept next to an empress and thought she was a chambermaid. He was forced to retreat to his parents' home in Ohio, a shrunken, bitter man living in his childhood bedroom. The tailored suits were replaced by worn-out jeans, the Porsche by his father's decade-old pickup truck. The calls from Tiffany stopped after a week. She had her own social fires to put out, her own reputation to salvage. She had bet on a horse that not only lost the race, but collapsed dead at the starting gate. He saw Catherine, of course. It was impossible not to. Her face was on the cover of Forbes, of Wired, of Time magazine. "The Woman Who Built Tomorrow," one headline read. "The Quiet Titan of Tech," read another. He watched her interviews, his stomach churning with a toxic cocktail of envy, hatred, and a strange, agonizing flicker of what might have been pride. He saw her speaking at global economic forums, advising presidents, and launching philanthropic initiatives that dwarfed her old, fabricated charity work. She was changing the world, just as she'd said she would. The divorce was swift and clinical. Catherine's lawyers were mercilessly efficient. The prenup held firm, a steel trap he had foolishly walked right into, blinded by his own arrogance at the time, thinking he was the one with the future assets to protect. He was left with nothing but the crushing weight of his own monumental stupidity. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Catherine Vance stood on the deck of the serenity, as it cut through the turquoise waters of the Aegean Sea. The sun was warm on her face, and the wind whipped stray strands of hair from her elegant ponytail. She wore simple white linen trousers and a blue cashmere sweater, a picture of relaxed, unburdened power. Leo Maxwell came to stand beside her, handing her a cup of tea. "The final papers came through this morning," he said quietly. "It's officially done." Catherine nodded, taking a sip. She stared out at the endless horizon where the sea met the sky. "Good. How do you feel?" Leo asked, his voice gentle. He was one of the few people who knew the whole story, who had been with her since the early days in the garage, coding until their fingers were numb. He had seen the quiet pain she had hidden for years behind a placid smile. She was silent for a long moment, considering the question. She didn't feel the triumphant glee or the fiery rage that a lesser person might have felt. She didn't feel hatred for Richard anymore. What she felt was a profound sense of release. "I feel like I've been wearing a coat that was 2 sizes too small for a decade," she said finally. "I kept trying to shrink myself to fit into it, telling myself it was a sensible, practical coat. But it was suffocating me. Now, I've finally taken it off, and I can breathe." She thought of Richard, not the broken man he had become, but the charming, ambitious young man she had first fallen in love with. She had wanted, so desperately, for him to be her partner, her equal. She had hidden her work, her intellect, her wealth, because she was afraid it would emasculate him. She had wanted him to love her, Catherine, not the CEO of Vance Innovations. But in her effort to protect his ego, she had allowed him to build a cage for them both. His was a cage of arrogance and illusion. Hers was a cage of secrets and self-diminishment. The party hadn't been an act of revenge. Not really. It had been a declaration of independence. It was the only way to shatter both cages at once, in a way so spectacular and final that there could be no going back. "Blackwood's company filed for Chapter 11 last week," Leo mentioned. "Without your merger, they were hollowed out." Catherine nodded again, a flicker of regret in her eyes. "A shame. There were good people there. But leadership starts at the top. He made his choice to enable Richard's behavior." She turned to Leo, a real smile gracing her lips, one that reached her clear, grey eyes. "Enough about the past. Let's talk about the future. Show me the latest schematics for the Mars project." Leo grinned. "I thought you'd never ask." He opened a tablet, and together they looked at blueprints for a new world, their heads close together, partners in every sense of the word. The yacht, once a stage for a domestic drama, was now what it was always meant to be. A base of operations, a floating think tank, a vessel carrying its captain not away from a failed past, but towards a limitless future. Catherine Vance looked out at the horizon, no longer just a wife, no longer a secret. She was the captain of her ship, the master of her destiny, sailing towards a dawn of her own creation. 2 years had passed. For Catherine Vance, they were years of exponential growth and profound purpose. For Richard Davenport, they were a slow, grinding erosion of self. The fury had long since cooled, leaving behind the cold, heavy sediment of resentment. He was back in Ohio, a ghost haunting the familiar streets of his youth, his fall from grace a cautionary tale whispered at the local country club he could no longer afford. He worked now. Not in a gleaming corporate tower, but behind the wheel of a refrigerated van for an upscale catering company. It was a humbling, anonymous existence. He delivered delicate canapés and crates of champagne to the very sort of parties he once attended, his presence now relegated to the service entrance. He told himself it was temporary, a blip, But the days bled into weeks, the weeks into months, and the months into the stark reality of his new life. One crisp autumn evening, he was assigned to a major gala at the city's newly built Science Museum. It was a high-profile event. The client had booked their most exclusive package. As Richard wheeled racks of artfully arranged food into the cavernous, star-lit atrium, he saw the banners. They were emblazoned with a sleek, familiar logo, a stylized V. It was the annual fundraising gala for the Vance Foundation for Women in STEM. His blood ran cold. For a moment, he considered walking out, feigning illness, driving the van into a ditch, anything to escape. But he was trapped. He needed the money. Swallowing the bitter taste of irony, he put on his black uniform jacket and melted into the background, just another face in the army of servers. From the shadows of the service corridors, he watched the world that had once been his. He saw faces he recognized, local politicians, business leaders, the kind of people who would have once shaken his hand and sought his opinion. None of them gave him a second glance. In his generic uniform, he was invisible, a functional part of the scenery. Then he saw her. Catherine was not an attendee. She was the gravitational center of the event. She moved through the room with an effortless grace, not the manufactured poise he had cultivated, but a deep, unshakable confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was. She was laughing with a group of young women, their faces bright with awe. They were the inaugural class of Vance scholars, the brilliant minds she was personally funding. Later, she took the stage. The room fell silent. Richard stood frozen by a pillar, his tray of empty wine glasses forgotten in his hand. She spoke of the future, of breaking barriers, of the responsibility that came with power. There was no bitterness in her voice, no hint of the personal war she had won. She had transcended it. Her battle was no longer with a single, faithless man. It was for the future of an entire generation of women. After her speech, as the applause washed over the hall, she made her way through the crowd. Her path took her directly towards Richard's station. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. His throat went dry. She was 10 feet away, 5. He could smell the faint, clean scent of her perfume. This was it, the moment of confrontation, of recognition. He braced himself for the flicker of shock, the flash of contempt, the icy dismissal. He held his breath. Catherine's eyes, clear and focused, swept past him. Her gaze lingered for a fraction of a second on the pillar he stood beside before moving on, scanning the crowd for the next person she needed to greet. She looked through him. Not with malice, not with intention, but with the simple, devastating reality of his own insignificance. He was a server, a pillar, a part of the room's architecture. He did not register. He did not exist. She turned away, smiling warmly at a young scholar who had approached her. The moment was over. Richard stood perfectly still, the weight of the tray in his hand suddenly unbearable. It wasn't the public humiliation on the yacht that had been his true punishment. It was this utter erasure. Her revenge was not a single, fiery act, but a slow, quiet extinction. Her world had grown so vast, so bright, so full of consequence, while his had shrunk to the size of this service corridor. He was a ghost at the feast of the life he had thrown away, and the one person he haunted could no longer even see him. He picked up another empty glass, his movements mechanical, his spirit finally, irrevocably, broken. The story of Richard and Catherine is a powerful, modern-day fable about perception versus reality. It's a chilling reminder that the people we think we know best are often the ones who hold the deepest secrets, and that underestimating someone based on the quiet role they play in your life can lead to your own spectacular downfall. True power isn't loud. It doesn't need constant validation. It works silently, patiently, building an empire while others are busy building an ego. Richard saw a simple wife. The world was about to see a queen. If this story of karmic justice and triumphant self-realization resonated with you, let us know in the comments below. What was the moment you knew Richard's world was about to end? Don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed the ride, and be sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We have so many more stories of intrigue, betrayal, and ultimate triumph coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thank you for listening. The diamond on Rosalind's finger felt heavier than a shackle, a cold, glittering reminder of the lie her life had become. To the world, she was the wife of Sterling Blackwood, a self-made tech millionaire who lived in a glass tower that scraped the New York sky. But within those silent, sterile walls, she was just a ghost in second-hand clothes. He called her his charity case, his little rustic project. Now, with their first child growing beneath her heart, his mockery had sharpened into a weapon. He didn't know the secret she guarded, a secret locked away in the annals of old money and dynastic power, a truth so vast it could swallow his new money empire whole, and not even register the meal. Tonight, at the annual Blackwood Foundation Gala, he planned to parade his poor, pregnant wife as a testament to his own magnanimity. He had no idea he wasn't hosting a party. He was orchestrating his own downfall. The penthouse on the 80th floor of One Vanderbilt was less a home and more a monument to Sterling Blackwood's ego. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of Manhattan, a sprawling kingdom of light and ambition that Sterling believed he had conquered. Every surface was cold, hard, and impossibly clean. Italian marble, polished chrome, black lacquer. It was a space designed to be admired, not lived in, much like Rosalind Hayes felt she was. For 2 years, she had tried to breathe life into the sterile expanse. A hand-thrown pottery vase she'd bought at a street fair was relegated to a cleaning closet. A colourful, hand-knitted Afghan was deemed tacky and disappeared. Sterling wanted everything to reflect his brand, new, sharp, and relentlessly modern. Rosalind, with her soft-worn cardigans and preference for dog-eared paperbacks over sterile e-readers, was a glaring, organic flaw in his minimalist masterpiece. Their courtship had been a whirlwind. He'd been captivated by her quiet grace and genuine smile, a refreshing anomaly in a world of calculated connections. He'd called her his real girl. But as his company, Apex Financial Solutions, skyrocketed in value, his affection began to curdle into condescension. Her lack of pedigree, once a charming novelty, became an embarrassment. "Rosalind, for God's sake, what is that?" he'd asked one evening, his voice laced with the weary disdain he usually reserved for incompetent junior analysts. He was pointing at the simple, gold-filled locket around her neck. "It was my mother's," she answered softly, her hand instinctively covering the worn oval. "It looks like something you'd find in a cereal box," he sniffed, turning back to his tablet. "We're meeting Carter and Jessica Vance for dinner at Per Se tonight. I'll have my assistant send over something from Tiffany's. Try not to look like you just wandered in from a farm in Ohio." She wasn't from a farm. She was from a quiet, tree-lined street in a forgotten corner of Connecticut, raised by a single mother who had valued books over bank balances. That was the story she had told him, and it was true as far as it went. She'd just omitted the part about the street being the service entrance to a sprawling 20-acre estate, and the books being first editions bound in Moroccan leather. The cruelty had escalated when she told him she was pregnant. She had hoped the news would mend the growing chasm between them, that the prospect of a family would rekindle the warmth he'd once shown. Instead, it had given him a new angle for his mockery. "My heir," he'd declared, a smirk playing on his lips as he surveyed her in the morning light. "Let's just hope the baby inherits my ambition, and not your simple sensibilities. We can't have a Blackwood scion thinking a trip to the public library is a major cultural event." Tonight was the Blackwood Foundation Gala, the pinnacle of Sterling's social calendar. It was an extravagant affair designed to cement his status among New York's philanthropic elite, and he had a special role for Rosalind. He found her in their cavernous walk-in closet, staring at the dress he had chosen for her. It was a sheath of shimmering, silver fabric by a designer whose name was spoken in hushed, reverent tones. It was beautiful, but it felt like a costume. "Perfect," he said, coming up behind her. His hands rested on her shoulders, but his touch was proprietary, not affectionate. "It'll hang on you beautifully. We need to accentuate your delicate state. It plays well." The magnanimous Sterling Blackwood, lifting his lovely, humble wife into the stratosphere. He gestured to a velvet box on the dresser. "And this." She opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of white satin, was a diamond necklace so bright it hurt to look at. It wasn't a gift. It was a prop. It was a price tag he was hanging around her neck to show everyone how much she was worth to him. "Sterling, it's too much," she whispered. "Nonsense. It's an investment in our image." He paused, his gaze hardening, as he noticed the simple, thin gold band on her ring finger. Her actual wedding ring, the one they'd picked out together in a small, dusty jewelry shop downtown before he became Sterling Blackwood. "You're not wearing that tonight. You'll wear the 10-carat rock I got you for our first anniversary, the one that actually looks like we can afford our life." Each word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall between them. She felt the familiar sting behind her eyes, the burn in her throat. She had held on to the hope that the man she married was still in there somewhere, buried beneath layers of arrogance and insecurity. "I was thinking," he continued, oblivious to her inner turmoil, "during my speech, I might talk a little about your background. Nothing too specific, of course. Just a touching little anecdote about how I found this diamond in the rough. It'll make the old money dinosaurs in the room feel generous when they write their checks. People love a good rags-to-riches story." He wasn't talking about his own story. He was talking about hers. He was going to paint a picture of her as a penniless waif he had rescued from obscurity. And he expected her to stand there, pregnant with his child, and smile gratefully. A quiet, cold resolve began to form in the pit of her stomach. She had endured the private snubs, the backhanded compliments, the slow erosion of her identity. She had told herself it was for the sake of their marriage, and now for the sake of their child. But to be publicly humiliated, to have her carefully constructed, private life turned into a cheap marketing ploy, that was a line she didn't know he would cross. "Don't look so morose, darling," he said, kissing the top of her head with a chilling lack of warmth. "This is a celebration, our celebration. Tonight, everyone will see just how lucky you are to be Mrs. Blackwood." As he walked away, Rosalind looked at her reflection in the mirror. The pale, tired woman staring back was a stranger, but deep within her eyes, a flicker of something else was igniting. It was the dormant fire of a lineage she had long since abandoned. The Vanderbilts were not known for their simplicity. They were known for building empires and crushing their enemies. Sterling Blackwood was about to learn that you can take the girl out of the dynasty, but you can't take the dynasty out of the girl. The days leading up to the gala were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Sterling, energized by the prospect of his grand performance, seemed to find new ways to underscore Rosalind's perceived inadequacies. He treated their shared life as a continuous project of refinement, with her as the unpolished primary subject. One afternoon, his mother, Beatrice Blackwood, came for tea. Beatrice was a woman who had clawed her way into society on the coattails of her late husband's modest manufacturing business, a fortune Sterling had leveraged and multiplied tenfold. She possessed all the snobbery of old money with none of its subtlety. "Rosalind, dear," Beatrice began, her eyes scanning the minimalist living room with approval. "Sterling tells me you're finally getting the hang of things. It must be so overwhelming for you." She picked up a decorative silver orb from the coffee table, polishing it with her thumb as if to remove some invisible smudge of poverty. "I'm managing just fine, Beatrice," Rosalind said, her voice even. She poured the tea, her hands steady. "Of course you are. You're a trooper." The compliment was delivered with the same inflection one might use for a well-behaved pet. "It's just, well, with the baby coming, standards are so important. We wouldn't want the child picking up any unrefined habits." Beatrice's gaze flickered pointedly toward Rosalind's simple flat shoes, tucked neatly by the sofa. Sterling, who had been observing from his armchair, chimed in. "Mother is right, Rosie. We need to start thinking about legacy. I was looking at preschools. There's a waiting list for the Dalton school that's 3 years long. We'll have to get our name on it now. I'll have to pull some strings, of course, given your lack of legacy connections." It was a conversation designed to exclude and diminish her. They spoke of her child as if it were a future commodity, a Blackwood asset whose value could be depreciated by her own history. She sat silently, the warmth from her teacup a small, inadequate comfort. Later that day, Sterling found her in the spare room she had hoped to turn into a nursery. She was unpacking a small wooden box, a collection of her most treasured possessions. Inside were faded photographs of her mother, a collection of sea glass they had gathered on a beach in Maine, and a worn copy of The Little Prince with her mother's handwritten notes in the margins. "What's all this junk?" Sterling asked from the doorway, his tone a familiar blend of curiosity and disgust. "They were my mother's," Rosalind said, her back to him. He picked up one of the smooth green pieces of sea glass. "You know, we could have a proper nursery designed. I saw a feature in Architectural Digest, fully automated crib, cashmere walls. We don't need it cluttered with sentiment." He tossed the piece of glass back into the box with a dismissive clink. That was the core of their disconnect. To him, things were valuable because of their price. To her, they were valuable because of their story. His entire identity was built on what he had acquired. Hers was built on what she had loved and lost. She had tried once, early in their marriage, to tell him the truth. They were lying in bed, the city lights a soft glow against the ceiling. "Sterling," she had begun, her heart pounding. "There's something about my family I haven't told you." He was scrolling through stock market futures on his phone. "My mother's family. They're not simple people. There's a history, a rather complicated one." He put his phone down, a flicker of genuine interest in his eyes. "Oh? Are you telling me you're descended from horse thieves? Don't worry, darling. I'm not a snob. Your past is your past." The comment, meant to be reassuring, was so patronizing, so utterly dismissive of the gravity of what she was trying to say, that the words died in her throat. He had already cast her in a role, and he wasn't interested in a revised script. He wanted her to be poor. It made his own story, the story of the great Sterling Blackwood, that much more heroic. To learn she came from anything other than abject poverty would spoil his narrative. So she had let it drop. The silence had been a small betrayal then. Now it felt like a catastrophic failure. The night before the gala, the pressure became unbearable. Sterling was rehearsing his speech in front of the living room's vast windows, using his reflection as an audience. And so, when I met Rosalind, he boomed, gesturing to an imaginary her. I saw a spirit untouched by the cynicism of our world. A woman of simple means, but with a wealth of character. He paused, turning to the real Rosalind, who was curled on the sofa. What do you think? Is simple means too on the nose? Or should I say, humble origins? Sterling, please don't, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Please don't talk about me in your speech. His face hardened. Why not? It's a wonderful story. It's our story. No, it's your story. It's a version of me you invented to make yourself look good. He scoffed, pacing the marble floor. Oh, I see. You're ashamed of where you come from. I'm trying to tell the world that it doesn't matter, that I love you despite it all, and you're throwing it back in my face. How ungrateful. Ungrateful? The word struck a nerve, sharp and painful. I'm not a project, Sterling. I'm your wife. I am the mother of your child. I am not a stepping stone for your social climbing. You knew who I was when you married me. He shot back, his voice rising. You knew what this world was like. Did you really think you could marry me and we'd spend our weekends tending a vegetable patch in some quaint cottage? This is the life. This is what I've built. And you are a part of the brand now. You need to start acting like it. He snatched the silver-framed photo from the side table. It was their wedding picture. They were smiling, and for a moment she could remember the feeling of his hand in hers, the genuine belief that their love could conquer anything. Look at you, he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. You were a nobody, a pretty face with nothing to your name. I gave you everything. This apartment, the clothes on your back, the food you eat, the diamonds I have to beg you to wear. I gave you a name. And tomorrow night, you will stand by my side, and you will smile, and you will look grateful for the incredible life I have provided. Do you understand me? He didn't wait for an answer. He slammed the photo back down, the glass cracking with a sharp retort that echoed in the silent, cavernous room. He stormed off toward their bedroom, leaving Rosalind alone with the fractured image of their marriage. She walked over and picked up the frame. A thin, spiderweb crack ran right between their smiling faces. It was a perfect metaphor. She traced the line with her finger. For months, she had been trying to hold the pieces together, to pretend the damage wasn't there. But the cracks were too deep. The entire structure was about to shatter. And as she stood there, with the weight of her past and the fear for her future pressing down on her, she knew she couldn't let him be the one to bring the whole thing crashing down in a public spectacle. If it was going to break, she would be the one to choose how. The ballroom at the plaza was a symphony of excess. Crystal chandeliers, weighing as much as small cars, dripped light onto a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. The air hummed with the buzz of polite conversation, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the subtle, relentless thrum of power. Every person in the room was a player, a donor, a connection. And tonight, Sterling Blackwood was positioning himself to be king. Rosalind stood by his side, a silent, silver-clad satellite to his blazing sun. The diamond necklace felt like a brand on her skin, cold and heavy. She smiled when he touched the small of her back. She nodded when he introduced her to titans of industry and their immaculately preserved wives. Her name was mentioned, but their eyes slid past her, landing on her burgeoning belly and then back to Sterling, the man of the hour. She was an accessory, proof of his virility and his supposed depth of character. "Sterling, my boy, a magnificent event," boomed a portly man with a florid face, clapping Sterling on the shoulder. He was Robert Driscoll, a real estate mogul with a ruthless reputation. His eyes, small and sharp, flicked to Rosalind. "And this must be the lovely wife. He never stops talking about you." "Rosalind, this is Robert Driscoll." "Robert, my better half," Sterling said with a proprietary grin. "A pleasure," Rosalind said, extending a hand. Driscoll ignored it, his gaze fixed on Sterling. "Found yourself a real gem, eh, Blackwood? Down to earth. Keeps a man grounded." The exchange was a perfect microcosm of her experience. She was an object to be discussed, not a person to be engaged. The evening wore on in a blur of forced smiles and empty pleasantries. Beatrice Blackwood held court at a central table, accepting compliments on her son's success as if they were her own. Every time her gaze fell on Rosalind, it was with a look of critical assessment, a silent reminder to stand up straight, to smile wider, to be a better prop. Finally, the moment arrived. The lights dimmed slightly, and Sterling was introduced to a round of enthusiastic applause. He strode to the podium, basking in the spotlight. He was a natural performer, his voice confident and charismatic as he spoke about the Foundation's work, about empowering underprivileged youth, about giving back to the city that had given him so much. Rosalind watched from their table, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. She felt the baby kick, a small, insistent flutter, as if it, too, sensed the impending storm. "But my success is not my own," Sterling said, his voice softening, drawing the room in. "It is built on the support and inspiration of the people I love. Most importantly, my incredible wife, Rosalind." He gestured for her to stand. A spotlight found her, pinning her in its glare. Reluctantly, she rose, her hands clasped in front of her. The applause felt like a wave of heat, suffocating her. "Now, many of you in this room were born into a world of comfort and privilege," Sterling continued, his eyes sweeping across the audience of heirs and CEOs. "I was not. I built my company from nothing, and Rosalind comes from an even humbler place than I do." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was not the standard, bland spousal tribute. This was something different. It was intimate, and it was cruel. When I met her, she was a waitress, working double shifts to make ends meet, with a spirit that shone brighter than any of the jewels in this room tonight. This was a complete fabrication. She had been working part-time at a quiet bookstore cafe while finishing her art history degree at Columbia, a degree her grandfather had grudgingly funded. But the fiction was better for his story. A waitress was so much more romantically destitute. "I fell in love with a woman who had nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of gold," he went on, his voice thick with faux emotion. "She reminds me every day what truly matters. She is my touchstone to reality, my constant reminder of the world outside our gilded cages." He paused, letting the weight of his manufactured sentiment settle over the room. People were dabbing their eyes. Beatrice was beaming with pride. They were all lapping it up. They saw a great man, a benevolent king who had plucked a commoner from obscurity and elevated her to his side. They didn't see the truth. They didn't see the constant belittling, the chipping away of her self-worth, the slow, agonizing death of their love. They saw a fairy tale. She was living in a horror story. So tonight, as you consider your donations," Sterling concluded, his eyes finding hers across the room, "I want you to think of Rosalind. Think of the potential that lies hidden in every corner of this city, waiting for a chance. She is my greatest investment. And now, carrying our first child, she is the embodiment of the future we are all trying to build." He raised his glass. "To my wife, Rosalind. My beautiful, perfect charity case." The room erupted in applause. The final 2 words, delivered with a loving smile, were for her alone. A secret, vicious little twist of the knife. Charity case. Something inside Rosalind broke. It wasn't a loud, dramatic snap, but a quiet, clean fracture. The tears that welled in her eyes were not of gratitude or pride. They were glass tears, sharp and cold. She did not let them fall. She held the gaze of her husband, the stranger on the stage, and for the first time, she did not try to hide the pain in her eyes. She let him see it. She let him see the ruin he had made. For a fleeting second, a flicker of something, shock, guilt, crossed his face. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the triumphant smile of a man who had just conquered the world. She sat down, her movements stiff and robotic. She endured the rest of the dinner, the fawning congratulations, the pats on her shoulder. She was a statue, a perfect model of the grateful wife. But inside she was already gone. She was packing a mental suitcase, walking out a mental door. When they finally returned to the sterile silence of the penthouse, Sterling was euphoric. "Did you see their faces, Rosie? They loved it. Driscoll pledged $500,000. We're the new power couple in this city." He loosened his bow tie, energized and triumphant. "You were perfect, the perfect picture of grace." Rosalind walked past him into the bedroom. She began to remove the jewelry, piece by piece, the heavy earrings, the glittering bracelet. Finally, the necklace. She laid it on his dresser, the diamonds winking coldly under the halogen lights. "You called me your charity case," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. He had the grace to look momentarily abashed. "Oh, that. It was just a turn of phrase, darling. A little flourish for the story." "It wasn't a story, Sterling. It was my life. And you sold it for applause." She turned to face him, and he finally saw that the woman who had been standing by his side all night was gone. In her place was someone he didn't recognize, someone with eyes as hard and unyielding as the diamonds he so admired. "I'm leaving," she said. He laughed, a short, incredulous bark. "Leaving? Don't be so dramatic. Where would you go? Back to waiting tables? You have nothing, Rosalind. Everything you are is because of me." "That," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "is where you are profoundly mistaken." She walked to the closet, not to her side with its designer gowns, but to the back, where a single, worn canvas duffel bag was stored, the bag she'd arrived with 2 years ago. He watched, a mixture of amusement and irritation on his face, as she pulled it out. This was a tantrum, he thought. A little hormonal outburst. She would pack a few things, he would let her stew for an hour, and then he would graciously forgive her. But she didn't pack the clothes he'd bought her. She packed her worn paperbacks, the small wooden box of her mother's things, a few simple sweaters. She took off the 10-carat diamond ring and placed it next to the necklace. She slid her simple gold wedding band back onto her finger. When she was done, she walked to the door, the duffel bag slung over her shoulder. "This is insane, Rosalind," he said, his voice finally losing its cocky edge. "You can't just walk out. You're pregnant with my child." "I am pregnant with my child," she corrected him, her hand resting on her belly. and I will not raise them in a house where their mother is seen as a project, a prop, or a charity case." She opened the door and walked out into the hallway without a backward glance. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, the sound as final as a gavel. Sterling Blackwood stood alone in his monument to himself, utterly bewildered. He was the king of the world, and his queen had just abdicated. The taxi ride from the gleaming spire of One Vanderbilt to a fourth-floor walk-up in the West Village felt like a journey between planets. Rosalind stared out the window, the glittering lights of the city blurring into abstract streaks. The adrenaline that had propelled her out of the penthouse was beginning to fade, leaving behind a deep, trembling exhaustion. She paid the driver with the last $80 she had in her wallet, a small emergency stash she kept hidden from Sterling. She climbed the creaking stairs to apartment 4B, her duffel bag feeling heavier with each step. She knocked softly. The door swung open to reveal her oldest friend, Penelope "Penny" Jones, a whirlwind of curly red hair, paint-splattered overalls and worried eyes. "Rosie, my God, I got your text. Get in here." Penny pulled her into a fierce hug that smelled of turpentine and chamomile tea. Penny's apartment was the antithesis of the penthouse. It was small, warm, and chaotic. Books were stacked on every available surface, canvases leaned against the walls, and a fat ginger cat named Marmalade blinked lazily from a pile of cushions. It was a home. Rosalind felt the tension in her shoulders release for the first time in years. The glass tears she had held back all night finally fell, hot and silent. "He called me his charity case," she whispered into Penny's shoulder, "in front of 1,000 people." "That man," Penny said, her voice a low growl, "is a walking, talking, vacant lot with a view." "I never liked him." She guided Rosalind to a well-worn sofa, pushed the cat aside, and wrapped a quilt around her. "Tea, and then you tell me everything." As Penny bustled in the tiny kitchen, Rosalind looked around the apartment. On the wall was a framed photograph of the two of them in college, bright-eyed and full of dreams, long before Sterling Blackwood and the weight of his world had entered her life. It felt like a picture of a different person. Over steaming mugs of tea, she recounted the entire evening, the words tumbling out of her in a rush of pain and anger. Penny listened, her expression hardening with every detail. "So that's it? You're done?" Penny asked when she'd finished. "I'm done," Rosalind confirmed. The words felt solid, real. "I can't bring a baby into that. I don't want my child to think that love is conditional, that a person's worth is measured by their net worth." "Good," Penny said firmly. "You can stay here as long as you need. We'll figure it out. You can get a job. I can sell a few more paintings. We'll manage." Rosalind smiled, a true, grateful smile. "Thank you, Penny. I knew I could count on you." "Always," Penny said. Then her expression grew serious. "So, are you going to make the call?" Rosalind knew exactly what she meant. The call she hadn't made in over 5 years. The call to a number she knew by heart. The number for the main office at the Vanderbilt estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. Her estrangement from her grandfather, Cornelius Vanderbilt, was a wound as deep as the one Sterling had inflicted. Cornelius was a man forged in the crucible of old-world industry and finance. He saw the world in terms of assets, legacies, and strategic alliances. When Rosalind, his only grandchild and heir apparent, had announced her intention to study art history instead of corporate law, he had been displeased. When she had fallen in love with and decided to marry the then up-and-coming, but pedigree-less Sterling Blackwood, he had been furious. "He is a flash in the pan," Cornelius had thundered, his voice echoing in the cavernous library of the estate. "A self-obsessed peacock with no foundation. Our name, our legacy, has been built over a century. You will not throw it away on some digital charlatan." "I love him, Grandpa," she had pleaded. "Love is a luxury," he had retorted. "Duty is a requirement. You choose him. You choose his world. You will have no part of mine." He had cut her off, not just financially, that she could handle, but emotionally. He had refused to take her calls, returned her letters unopened. Her inheritance, the vast fortune of Vanderbilt Global Holdings, was to be redirected to a charitable trust upon his death. She had been disowned. And so, she had built a new life, a simple one, pretending the Vanderbilt name meant nothing to her. Now, pregnant and alone, with less than $100 to her name, the world her grandfather represented was her only remaining lifeline. Not for the money, but for the safety, the security it could provide for her child. She took a deep breath. "I have to." Penny handed her the phone. Rosalind's fingers trembled as she dialed the familiar number. It was late, but she knew someone would answer. The Vanderbilt estate never truly slept. A crisp, familiar voice answered on the second ring. "Vanderbilt residence." "Abernathy? Is that you?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Miss Rosalind?" The voice of Arthur Abernathy, her grandfather's lifelong solicitor and confidant, was filled with disbelief. "Yes, Arthur, it's me." "My dear child, are you all right? The master has been—" He trailed off, his professional composure faltering. "I'm fine, Arthur. I need to speak with him." "Is he there?" Another pause, this one longer, heavier. "Miss Rosalind, there is something you need to know. Your grandfather is unwell, very unwell. He has been asking for you." The floor seemed to drop out from under her. All the anger and resentment she held for her grandfather evaporated, replaced by a cold dread. "What do you mean, unwell? How long?" "He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 6 months ago. It is advanced. He didn't want you to be told. He said it would look like he was trying to manipulate you with sentiment." 6 months. While she had been living in her gilded cage, enduring Sterling's cruelty, her grandfather had been dying. The stubborn pride of 2 Vanderbilts had cost them precious time. "Arthur," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I need to see him." "He is weak, but he is lucid. He has been putting his affairs in order," Abernathy said. "In fact, I was instructed to contact you this week. It seems you have made my task easier. There are significant developments regarding the estate and the Vanderbilt Global Charter, developments that directly concern you." Abernathy's tone was formal and weighted with meaning. This was more than a deathbed reconciliation. This was business. "Can you come to my office tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock?" he asked. 45 Rockefeller Plaza. "I'll be there," she said, her mind reeling. She hung up the phone, the news of her grandfather's illness crashing over her. He was dying. He had been asking for her, and there were developments. Penny put a comforting hand on her arm. "What is it?" "My grandfather is sick," Rosalind said, her eyes distant. "He's dying. And something else is happening. Abernathy wants to see me tomorrow." She looked down at her hands, at the simple gold band on her finger. She had run from one world of power and expectation into the arms of a man who created his own toxic version of it. She had tried so hard to be just Rosalind Hayes, a simple woman living a simple life. But she wasn't. She was Rosalind Vanderbilt Hayes, and it seemed her past was not just catching up with her. It was about to collide with her present with the force of a freight train. Sterling Blackwood woke the next morning to 2 things: the deafening silence of the penthouse, and a raging hangover. For a moment, he expected to see Rosalind beside him, a placid look on her face, ready to absorb his inevitable apology and move on. The empty space in the bed was a cold, stark reality check. He called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. He sent a text. "Rosie, this is ridiculous. Come home, we'll talk." No reply. He sent another. An hour later. "Fine, be stubborn. You'll realize you can't survive without me." Silence. He went to his office, a sleek, glass-walled corner of the 60th floor of his own building. He expected to feel powerful, in control. Instead, the triumph of the previous night felt hollow, curdled. He couldn't focus on the market analytics streaming across his multiple monitors. His mind kept replaying the look in Rosalind's eyes just before she'd walked out. It wasn't anger. It was finality. His assistant, a hyper-efficient young woman named Claire, knocked on his door. "Mr. Blackwood, page 6 is on line 1. They have some questions about last night's gala." "Put them through," he said, straightening his tie. This was his element. Public relations. "Sterling, Jack from page 6, a slick voice said. "Heard the gala was a smashing success, but we're also hearing some whispers that your lovely wife made a rather hasty exit. Any trouble in paradise?" Sterling's blood ran cold. How could they know already? "Don't be absurd, Jack," he said, forcing a laugh. "Rosalind was just feeling a bit faint. The pregnancy, you know, all the excitement. I sent her home to rest. She's the most important thing to me." It was a plausible lie, and Jack seemed to buy it, for now, but the call was a warning shot. The perfect facade he had so carefully constructed was showing cracks. A pregnant wife leaving a gala early was one thing. A pregnant wife leaving her husband was a scandal. By midday, his anxiety was a frantic buzzing beneath his skin. He called Beatrice. "She actually left?" his mother shrieked, her voice a piercing needle over the phone. "Sterling, you have to fix this. Think of our reputation. What will people say?" "I'm trying, Mother," he snapped. "She's not answering her phone." Well, where could she have gone? Does she have any friends? That dreadful artist girl with the messy hair. Penny, of course. He found her number in Rosalind's old contacts list, which was still synced to the family cloud account. He dialed, his thumb jabbing at the screen. Penny answered on the first ring. "What do you want, Sterling?" "Is she with you?" he demanded, bypassing any pleasantries. "Even if she were, why on earth would I tell you?" Penny's voice was dripping with contempt. "Listen to me, you little bohemian nobody," he snarled, his patience gone. "This is a private matter between my wife and me. Put her on the phone right now." "No," Penny said simply. "And if you ever call this number again, or show up at my door, I'll get a restraining order so fast it'll make your stock price drop. Goodbye, Sterling." She hung up. He slammed his phone down on the desk, a surge of impotent rage washing over him. He was Sterling Blackwood. People didn't hang up on him. Wives didn't walk out on him. The world revolved around him. Or it was supposed to. The afternoon brought more trouble. A call from Robert Driscoll, the real estate mogul. "Sterling," Driscoll began, his jovial tone from the gala gone, replaced by a cool professionalism. "My finance team is reviewing the pledge we discussed. There's some concern. The stability of a man's home life often reflects the stability of his business practices. We're going to hold off on transferring the funds for now, just until the dust settles." It was a veiled message, but the meaning was clear. The whispers were getting louder. His image as the stable, magnanimous family man was a key part of his brand. Without Rosalind by his side, the brand was tarnished. Desperation began to set in. He drove home, the penthouse feeling less like a castle and more like a prison. He walked into their closet and saw her side, half empty. The designer gowns and shoes he'd bought her were still there. She had only taken the simple, inexpensive things she'd arrived with. It was an insult, a calculated rejection of everything he had given her. He saw the cracked picture frame on the bedside table. He picked it up. He had done this. His stupid, arrogant speech, his desire to turn her into a character in his own play, had driven her away. A flicker of genuine remorse sparked within him, but it was quickly extinguished by his ego. She would be back. She had to come back. What other choice did she have? She had no money, no connections, no power. He had it all. It was just a matter of time. He would win her back with a grand gesture. He'd buy her a new car, a private island. He would apologize, of course, but from a position of power. He would be the benevolent husband, forgiving his hysterical, pregnant wife for her outburst. He began to plan his strategy, his mind shifting back to the familiar comfort of tactics and leverage. He saw this not as a crisis of love, but as a hostile negotiation. And Sterling Blackwood never lost a negotiation. He was so engrossed in his own comeback narrative that he didn't notice the black town car that had been parked across the street from his building all afternoon, its occupant watching the entrance with patient, observant eyes. He didn't know that while he was plotting to reclaim his asset, the game had already changed. The board had been flipped, and he wasn't even a player anymore. He was just an obstacle about to be removed. The offices of Abernathy, Finch, and Lowell occupied the entire 50th floor of 45 Rockefeller Plaza. It was a world away from the cold modernity of Sterling's domain. Here, the walls were panelled in dark mahogany, the air smelled of old leather and lemon polish, and the silence was deep and respectful. It was the quiet, unshakable sanctuary of old money. Rosalind, dressed in a simple black dress she'd borrowed from Penny, felt a strange sense of homecoming. This was the world she had run from, but its customs were etched into her bones. Arthur Abernathy greeted her himself. He was a tall, slender man in his late 70s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and a demeanor of unwavering calm. He had known her since she was a child. "Miss Rosalind," he said, his voice warm. "It is a great relief to see you." He led her into a large, book-lined conference room with a sweeping view of St. Patrick's Cathedral. A thick file, bound in blue leather, sat in the center of the polished table. "Please sit," he said gently. "Would you care for some tea? Water?" "Water would be lovely. Thank you, Arthur." As he poured her a glass from a crystal carafe, she got straight to the point. "How is he?" Abernathy's face fell. "The doctors have given him weeks, perhaps a month. He is comfortable at the estate. He refuses to go to a hospital." Rosalind closed her eyes, absorbing the finality of it. "He asked for me." "Constantly," Abernathy confirmed. "His pride is a formidable thing, my dear, but his love for you is stronger. He regrets the lost yours more than you can know." He slid the blue file across the table toward her. "Which brings us to this. Your grandfather has spent the last few months making radical changes to his estate planning and the controlling charter of Vanderbilt Global Holdings." He opened the file. The documents inside were dense with legal terminology, but Abernathy guided her through them with practiced ease. "As you know, upon your marriage, your grandfather amended his will to leave the entirety of his estate to the Vanderbilt Foundation," he began. "5 days ago, he signed a new last will and testament. It revokes all previous versions." He turned a page, revealing the signature block. Cornelius Vanderbilt's signature, once a bold, authoritative scrawl, was now shaky and thin. But it was unmistakably his. "The new will names you, Rosalind Vanderbilt Hayes, as the sole beneficiary of his entire personal fortune, the properties, the art collections, the trusts, an estimated value of approximately $3 billion. Rosalind felt the air leave her lungs. It was an incomprehensible sum, a number with no basis in reality. But Abernathy wasn't finished. "That, however, is the smaller part of the matter," he said, his expression grave. He tapped the thickest document in the file. "This is the charter for Vanderbilt Global Holdings. It is one of the largest privately held conglomerates in the world, with interests in shipping, real estate, and technology. Its value is difficult to calculate precisely, but a conservative estimate would be north of $15 billion. He let that number hang in the air. Sterling's entire empire, the source of all his pride and arrogance, was a fraction of this. A rounding error. The charter had a complex succession plan involving a board of trustees, Abernathy continued. Your grandfather has invoked a little-known dynastic succession clause, which required the unanimous consent of the current board, a consent he has secured. Upon his passing, controlling interest and the position of chairman of the board of Vanderbilt Global Holdings will pass directly to you." Rosalind stared at him, speechless. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was an empire, a throne. "Why?" she finally whispered. "After all these years. Why?" "He told me," Abernathy said, his gaze direct and compassionate, "that he spent 5 years trying to protect his legacy from you. And he has spent the last 6 months realizing that his only true legacy is you. He made a mistake, a terrible, prideful mistake. This is his attempt, however late, to rectify it." He slid a final document from the file. It was a pre-signed, notarized petition for divorce. "There is one more thing," Abernathy said, his voice dropping. "We have been monitoring your husband. My grandfather hired private investigators months ago. He wanted to know what kind of life you were living. They have compiled a comprehensive dossier." He gestured to another, even thicker file on the credenza. His financial overextensions, his questionable business dealings, and his treatment of you. It is all there. Your grandfather referred to Mr. Blackwood as a house of cards in a hurricane. Rosalind felt a chill run down her spine. While she had felt alone and powerless, her grandfather, from a distance, had been watching over her, gathering weapons for a war she didn't even know she could fight. This petition names you as the plaintiff, citing irreconcilable differences. I have also taken the liberty of drafting the terms of a settlement. We will not be asking for alimony. We will be offering him a one-time, sealed payment of $5 million, contingent on the signing of a permanent, unbreakable non-disclosure agreement. He is to never speak your name, or the Vanderbilt name, in public or private, for the rest of his life. It was ruthless. It was brilliant. It was pure Cornelius Vanderbilt. He wasn't just facilitating a divorce. He was buying Sterling's silence, erasing him from her life as cleanly and efficiently as a surgeon excising a tumor. Should he refuse, Abernathy added calmly, the contents of that dossier will be anonymously leaked to the Wall Street Journal and the SEC. I do not believe he will refuse. Rosalind looked down at the documents, at the vast, world-altering power laid out before her. Yesterday, she had been a penniless, pregnant woman running from an emotionally abusive husband. Today, she was one of the wealthiest and most powerful women in the world. She thought of Sterling's smug, triumphant face at the gala. She thought of him calling her his charity case. The irony was so profound it was almost painful. He, who had mocked her for having nothing, had built his entire kingdom on a foundation of debt and bravado. And she, the simple girl he had pitied, was the secret heir to a fortune that could crush him without a second thought. Her hand went to her belly. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge was a small, petty emotion. This was about justice. This was about protecting her child, about building a future free from the shadow of a man like Sterling Blackwood. This was about reclaiming her name, her identity, and her power. She picked up a heavy, gold-plated pen from the desk. "Where do I sign?" she asked, her voice clear and steady, the voice of a Vanderbilt. The meeting was held in the neutral territory of Arthur Abernathy's mahogany-panelled conference room. Sterling arrived first, pacing with the impatient arrogance of a man who believed he was there to accept a surrender. He likely imagined a tearful, destitute Rosalind, begging to be taken back. He was unprepared for the woman who entered. Flanked by Abernathy, she was not the timid wife he had tormented, but a figure of serene, unshakable calm. Dressed in an elegant navy dress that bespoke quiet power, she met his gaze without a flicker of fear. "Rosalind," Sterling began, attempting a placating tone. "This has gone on long enough. Let's go home." "Please have a seat, Mr. Blackwood," Abernathy interjected, his voice coolly formal. Sterling sat, thrown off balance. "What is this?" he sneered at Rosalind. "Are you trying to sue me? You can't afford a firm like this, darling." "Mr. Abernathy is my family's legal counsel," she said, her voice steady. "He is here to present the terms of our divorce." Sterling laughed until Abernathy slid a document across the table. His smirk vanished as his eyes fell upon the plaintiff's name. Rosalind Vanderbilt Hayes. He looked from the paper to her, his face paling. "Vanderbilt, what kind of joke is this?" "It's no joke," Rosalind said quietly. "My grandfather is Cornelius Vanderbilt." The name landed with the force of a physical blow, shattering Sterling's entire reality. He was a minnow who had been mocking a leviathan. You lied to me," he stammered. "I omitted," she corrected. "I wanted to be loved for who I was. You saw a project, a charity case." Her use of his own cruel words struck him dumb. As if on cue, Abernathy tapped a second, thicker file. "This dossier details your company's financial irregularities, Mr. Blackwood. The SEC would find it very compelling." Sterling was trapped. Rosalind laid out the ultimatum with chilling precision. He would sign the divorce petition and a permanent NDA. In return for his silence, he would receive a settlement. He would then vanish from her life and the life of their child forever. "My child," he choked, a last desperate grasp for leverage. "Your heir," Rosalind's voice was ice. "The one you hoped wouldn't inherit my simple sensibilities? Do not worry. Our child will be raised as a Vanderbilt, free from your cruelty and shallow ambition. You will not be a part of their world." Defeated, the titan of industry crumbled. With a trembling hand, he signed his life away and walked out of the room, a ghost. Weeks later, Rosalind stood on the terrace of the Vanderbilt estate. She had reconciled with her grandfather before he passed, and he died knowing his legacy was in strong hands. Now the chairman of his global empire, she felt the baby kick. Sterling had tried to define her worth with diamonds and insults, never realizing her true power was a heritage she carried within. The poor wife was gone, and in her place stood a queen, ready to rule. Rosalind's story is a powerful reminder that our true worth is never defined by someone else's opinion or by the price tag they try to put on us. It's a fire that burns within, a legacy of strength that we carry in our spirit, whether we come from a palace or a quiet street. She endured the mockery and humiliation, believing her value was diminished, only to discover that she held an empire in her hands the entire time. Her journey wasn't just about inheriting a fortune, it was about inheriting her own power and self-worth. What did you think of Sterling's downfall? Was it justified? What would you have done in Rosalind's position? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of justice and empowerment, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story that makes you think, feel, and triumph.